right, so hi folks. This is Anthony Korf. I'm Artistic Director of Riverside Symphony and serve as its composer in residence. Just under a year ago, George Rothman and I were looking to put our season together, and I was charged, as I usually am, in fact always, of finding worthy new works. And I reached out to my colleague, Melinda Wagner, who many of you know is a Pulitzer Prize-winning composer, and I might add one who hopefully will have a piece written for us for next season. And I hadn't called on Mindy before, and she gave me a list of 8 composers, and she said, check these younger people out. And happily, the first composer I listened to and the first work I listened to is the piece that Riverside Symphony will be performing on Saturday night. And I'm delighted to introduce the composer of that piece to my right, Theo Chandler, who is the composer of the wonderful newish Oboe Concerto. Welcome, Theo. Theo will be at the performance on Saturday, yes, and we'll address the audience briefly before the performance, but we have a chance now to discuss a few things about the piece that we hope will be illuminating. Theo, I was actually at rehearsal this morning and hearing the piece for the second time. I should add that I heard the piece once. I took a link to the piece. I sent it to the conductor, George Rothman. I said, check this out. And 10 minutes later, your piece, not 10 minutes, because he had to listen to it. And that's one thing I want to talk about is its extraordinary length, but worth every minute. And it was one of the easiest pieces to program. It's a very prepossessing work, and had the pleasure of hearing it rehearsed this morning. And I want to actually start with a piece that will precede yours, which is a Summer Day Suite by Prokofiev, which I wouldn't expect you or many people to be aware of, even though Riverside Symphony did it many years ago. So Summer Day Suite, if I've got that right, was a work that Prokofiev wrote for children putatively, and it was originally a piano piece. Yet Prokofiev, being Prokofiev, when you hear it, it sounds like it was written for orchestra because of the enormous, uncanny gift he had. Yet, as a composer, I can hear it and I can understand it as a piano work, which I've never heard in that version. That it's all explained and explainable and would be on a piano. Whereas your work, I'm very struck by how it is so intrinsically and inextricably tied up with the instrumental forces you have, as if the orchestra composed the piece in tandem with you. And I say this because it's just my own experience as a composer that a lot of that wouldn't necessarily sound great on the piano, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great credit to you. And I mean, this is not supposed to be a log rolling session, but nonetheless, that you, at a reasonably young age, have really seemed to love the orchestra in a way, or love this orchestra. So I wanted to throw that out there because the continuity of the piece itself is provided by the sounds that you choose in certain regards. I mean, it's so I'm sure you can speak to this. I've already lit a little bit of a fire.
Right. I mean, what I would say about that is, for me, the first inspiration I usually have for a piece is like the instruments themselves, like just sort of imagining what sort of things they could play, the first movement of the piece, the strings are doing these rolled chords, with, bowing back and forth across all the strings. Like that was one of the first ideas that came to me. Like, what if you just had a piece where like all of the strings, they're basically just playing these rolled chords the whole time. And then the oboe can sort of be this sort of haunting melody floating above the whole texture. And so I hadn't really even come up with a note yet. when I had that idea, and I got this sense like, oh, I can make a structure out of that where there are these rolled chords, the oboe comes out, then it reaches a climax, and then the violins take over the melody, and then maybe in the end the oboe can be paired with a solo string player, and that can sort of round out the piece. And then from there, it was a matter of figuring out the right notes to make all of that sound really beautiful. And fortunately, the way the strings are the way this, the violin strings are G, D, A, E, right? So like there are certain comfortable like positions they can do to make certain chords. And so the idea was just, I had kind of limited options for what the notes could be. So I, work. It was pretty easy to make decisions,
So basically, the open strings, when you say, you mean open string formations?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just knowing, the open strings of the instrument, you end up there are certain combinations if you're trying to make a 4-note chord out of those strings, like some hand positions.
Oh, I see. So that became your pitch world,
right? It like came out of how just the instrument is set up, and so, and yeah, and really that's kind of how I think of almost every piece I write, is I try to make each section of the piece defined by what the job of the instruments is. Like like I'll assign a certain job to each instrument and they play that role for the entire section of the piece. And I feel like that gives it a lot of cohesion and gives that sort of orchestral focus, the orchestral sort of nuance that you're talking about by doing that.
Yeah, I think that many composers would say more or less their version of this, of what you just said, but the sensitivity to pitch that is shown and the harmonic sensibility in your piece is ultimately what I gravitate to as a listener and as a composer. And there are many pieces nowadays that rely on beautiful sounds, as it were, but they become very unbeautiful if they're divorced from the sense of real continuity and line, which I think this piece does. And I think it's time to point out to our listeners that the work is in five movements. Am I correct? Is it 5?
Six.
Okay, we only got to 5 of the movements today, but you were talking specifically in that little essay about the first movement and how you the first movement. Okay, and then something else happens in the next. So I think I don't want to go on too long about pitch because it is, perhaps a little bit abstruse for a conversation like this. But the fact is that there is always a sense of line, and that I find that each section that seems to focus on sound is soon rescued by a harmony that directs the piece forward. Is that something that you are? Well, of course you're aware of it, but I would guess it to be very important to you, because the sound is static, right? And then the sound can change and then it becomes static again. But only harmony and line can get you from the beginning of the piece to the end, in my estimation. So
right, that's really beautifully said. I think that the difference in how those things move. And I guess for me, I made a list that I put on my wall for every piece that I write, where it's a list of everything that's important to me to make a 100% like Theo Chandler piece. And two of those.
Is this a true story?
Sorry?
Is this a true story?
Yeah. Oh, and I have it above my piano. So every time I feel like I'm not getting what I want out of a piece, I can just say, oh, I'm missing this thing. Like I can go down the list and realize, oh, I'm missing this thing that is important to me. But two of those things are melody and what I call magic. You might call that orchestration or something.
Okay.
But so I feel like I really love writing concertos because you get to have the constant melody of the soloist you get to have that thing that, you know, connects you to your humanity, really. You know, like everyone can sing a melody, it's part of your body. Like that, when you hear someone playing a melody, I feel like it touches to your like emotional core. And then you have all the magic, all the different textural effects and everything that are delight you in the meantime. So you can make a piece that goes back and forth between those two things. Yeah.
Well, good. I'm glad I'm onto something. You certainly are.
Yes.
What I have over my on my wall where I compose, I have Beethoven and Schoenberg scowling down at me constantly. So I'm glad you create your positive world. Mine is rather coming from the authoritarian um, and daunting, should we say. Yes, master. Um, did you did you the piece is long, but it doesn't seem long. I like sometimes short pieces that seem longer than they are. This is a longer piece that seems shorter than it is. Did you have an idea of the length and the 6 movements and all that at the beginning, or did you find yourself, well, I better add a movement or go back and stick another one in, which I'm currently doing with a song cycle, putting in an extra one earlier.
Actually, yeah, it might be surprising to hear that there was an additional movement. It was going to be 7 movements, and I had to take it out because I thought it just wasn't as good as the other movements. Yeah, I had a sense that I wanted to write something. I don't know. I think 30 minutes might be the longest oboe concerto. I mean, there have been tons in the world, but like it could be. And I kind of felt like I wanted to write, I really love the oboe, and I wanted to write something where I could give it everything that I thought about the instrument, like give the oboist so many opportunities to show so many different sides of themselves. And I just felt like it needed to be that long to feel. I guess I feel like sometimes the oboe, it can come off like kind of a limited instrument. But having lived with oboists and heard like all the different things that can be done with the instrument just as they're practicing, you know, like overhearing all the things that they do, I think it's like there's like an abundance of possibilities with the oboe. And I felt like I really wanted to show that aspect of the instrument, just that it's very versatile, actually. And it took a 30-minute piece to make that happen, I thought.
Yeah. You know, that actually comes through. I mean, it really does. My own anecdote in that, before I ask you what your instrument or instruments were, I played oboe for a while, and it took me a long time to recover from that. So I had to win back. It had to win me back. That's no insult on the oboe, but what are your instruments, or what is your instrument?
I clarinet is my main instrument. I can get around on the piano a little bit, but the clarinet, I did a whole undergrad degree on clarinet and everything. So you know, I was playing with oboists and wind quintets and stuff all throughout my undergrad and all of that. So yes.
You think of it as exotic?
The oboe?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, I can think of a lot of examples where composers have used it that way.
Yeah.
I personally, I didn't feel like I wanted to. I didn't try to make any sort of exotic sounding music with the oboe in my concerto. Maybe if it comes across that way, that's interesting to me. But
I don't know. I was projecting.
Yeah.
No, I think of it that way as a very it demands our attention, and it's not what I would call a blending instrument.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
It's kind of the queen of the winds, but yeah, no, I completely understand that, and it totally makes sense, the breadth that you've given the work, and I think that our audience is going to really enjoy it, the voyage that you take your listener on. But just one final question about the ensemble is strings and percussion and piano. So, but it sounds nothing like the Bartok. I mean, not even remotely. But I think I think even a new listener or someone new to classical music will be struck by its resourcefulness and really the imagination that's employed. I just using those instruments, was that a limitation imposed on you by the circumstances, i.e., that was the band you had, or could you have had other instruments?
Well, the initial piece I created, basically I wrote a grant proposal for it, and so I chose the instrumentation starting from there, and I kind of thought, it seemed to me that adding woodwinds, adding brass, it's just gonna like off the balance will feel wrong. I mean, like even if they don't play while the oboe plays and they only play in loud spots, it's still gonna feel kind of I didn't feel any need to make it big and boisterous in that way. I feel like I'm much more interested in the subtleties and the magic that can be made with, like, strings and percussion are perfect. Like, you get the sort of resonance of the percussion instruments and like all the different effects strings can do. I just thought that matched sort of the size of the oboe's sound really well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I do indeed think you chose well, and I can't wait till we give it its New York premiere in just a few hours.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited it's in Alice Tully Hall. I love that hall.
Yeah, it's a good hall. It's a good hall.
Yeah.
It'll be good for the piece. Well, Theo, thank you. I look forward to you being in New York, and thanks for dropping by.
Yes, thank you.
Most welcome.